Hello there and welcome everyone. I'm Steadfast and I make videos about Lorcana. Today we're going to look at some exciting new cards coming in Rise of the Floodborn, Snow White, and the Seven Dwarfs. These are brand new revealed amber characters that synergize together, but are they good enough to build a dedicated deck around? And how do they work alongside other cards and other ink colors? Although Rise of the Floodborn is still a few weeks away, there's a lot we can learn from a close look at the Seven Dwarfs. A ton of players and articles are going over the cards and showing them off, but no one's really discussing their potential as a core deck or as new packages within existing decks. Will they become a new staple in top decks or be stuck on the sidelines? So let's dive in and talk about the Seven Dwarfs. Are they bad or broken? First off, as I've already shown off a bit, the artwork of these cards does indeed connect with a really nice panorama. I love that artistic aspect of these cards, but it's not all thematic. The dwarves really do work together mechanically as well. But before breaking them down, let's take a look at Snow White, Unexpected House Guest. Along with the dwarves, we're finally getting a Snow White card in Lorcana. She's a 2-cost uninkable amber character, a storyborn hero and princess. She has 1 strength, 2 willpower, and quests for 1 lore. Her ability, How Do You Do, allows you to pay 1 less ink to play 7 dwarfs characters. As the very first Disney princess, I was surprised to not see Snow White in the first chapter, but it makes sense that she would join in now alongside the 7 dwarves. And as expected, they work well together. And out of all of the dwarfs plus Snow White, she's the single uninkable character, which is reasonable as she's a key card in the overall strategy that creates a lot of value for the dwarfs as you play them throughout the game. And I really like that the others are inkable. It would feel a bit bad to require 8 or more uninkables to run a full dwarf-focused core of a deck. As far as raw stats go, Snow White is pretty weak, but her ability to act as a catalyst for the dwarfs is what makes her valuable. Don't forget, you could play out more than 1 copy of Snow White to stack the discount for dwarves. We've seen a similar interaction with Mickey, Wayward Sorcerer, and his brooms, although getting 2 4-cost Mickeys out isn't quite as easy as the 2-cost Snow White. I can definitely see her being played on turn 2, as well as a second Snow White on turn 3 alongside a 2 or 3-cost dwarf. I think that's a powerful 1-2 punch that many people are overlooking when discussing the potential for the 7 dwarves. Also worth noting is there's a very high likelihood we'll see a Floodborn Snow White, or at least a Dreamborn version of Snow White, but I'll discuss that a bit later. Let's get to the 7 dwarfs. I'll go in order of ascending cost so you can think about your character curve throughout the game. At 2 ink, we have 2 of the 7 dwarves, Sneezy and Sleepy. Sneezy is up first. He's a 2-cost inkable character with 1 strength and 4 willpower, questing for 1. His ability allows you to reduce a character's strength by 1 when you play him or any other dwarf character. I think the 2-cost 1/4 is a decent stat line, especially if you end up playing Sneezy for less with a Snow White or 2. His ability is also pretty decent. It's essentially a lighter version of Maximus on its own, but if you end up using it every turn with dwarfs played, or even stacking it with multiple Sneezys on board, I could see it becoming super annoying, and it allows you to challenge in favorably and keep your dwarves on board. You can also reduce characters' strength down to get them within a good window for a great Rapunzel heal, so there's already a ton of great amber synergy happening. Sleepy is up next. He's a 2-cost, 2 strength, 3 willpower character that quests for 2 lore. However, he has the Yawn ability, which means he must enter play exerted due to his sleepiness. Because of that, he kind of reminds me a bit of Simba if Simba didn't have bodyguard, so that doesn't feel great. But I do think he could serve as an early aggro threat that simply allows the opponent a chance to deal with him before he gets any lore on the board. Again, combined with 1 Snow White, he becomes a 1-cost double lore character with 3 willpower, which could be quite good. However, because he comes in exerted, he's unable to be exerted when played with Rockstar Stitch, so keep that in mind when thinking about amber combos. Next up, we have 2 3-cost dwarves, Doc and Dopey. Doc comes in as a 3-cost, 2 strength, 3 willpower character who can quest for 2. His ability is a fun one. Whenever he quests, you may pay 1 less ink for the next character you play this turn. Right away, we could consider him a character version of Lantern, which is pretty neat, and with his stat line as a 3-cost amber character, I could see him replacing Mickey Mouse True Friend in decks that like to run Mickey, such as 2 of my favorite Chapter 1 decks, Orange Midrange and Lemon Lime Aggro. I think he also imitates another fan favorite Mickey, Detective Mickey. Instead of adding to the inkwell and skipping 4 ink on the next turn like Mickey, he quests and lets you play out your Maleficent or other 5-cost character like Cusco or Belle on turn 4. It's not an exact one-for-one comparison or replacement, but I could see him in an Amber Sapphire mid-range list as a strong 3 cost in addition to Detective Mickey. Because of all that, I think Doc is the first dwarf that I could see becoming a strong card even outside of a strictly dwarf-focused deck. Next we have another 3 cost dwarf with Dopey. His stats are 2 strength, 2 willpower, and 1 lore, and his ability reads, when this character is banished, your other 7 dwarves characters get +2 strength until the start of your next turn. Dopey comes across as a removal catalyst. Run him into something for 2 damage that'll take him out, and suddenly your dwarves are all boosted up. He doesn't feel nearly as great of a play on turn 3 as Doc, and even if he gets his cost reduced, I don't love him all too much. Scenarios where you'd want to challenge in a few times are a bit rare to set up, especially in the early game. I think his main use will be as an anti-aggro tool, helping your dwarves punch into questers, bodyguards, and through resist. I think perhaps if his stats were instead 3-1 or something, maybe I'd like him a bit more. But maybe with some more play, he'll reveal a bit more power that I'm overlooking at the moment. Next we have our 4 cost dwarfs, Grumpy and Bashful. First, let's look at Grumpy, who comes in at 3 strength and 4 willpower and can quest for 1 lore. He's here to boost up your other dwarves with +1 strength as long as he's on the board. Along with Dopey, as we saw earlier, there's quite a bit of challenge-focused power in the dwarves. I think overall Grumpy feels a bit more consistent compared to Dopey, but neither are too exciting for me. I may feel a lot different once put into practice, however, there's a decent chance that decks centered around Cogsworth and other resist styles will run wild in Rise of the Floodborn. So a card like Grumpy that could boost the strength of a super dwarf-focused list could turn out very useful. Bashful also joins in as a 4 cost dwarf. With 2 strength, 5 willpower, and the ability to quest for 3, Bashful's looking quite aggressive for someone so introverted. His limiting factor comes from his bashfulness, as you'll see on his card ability. He can't quest unless you have another dwarf character in play. Otherwise, his stat line as a 4 cost Amber character reminds me of Cinderella. And with Snow White on the field reducing his cost by 1, he does a great Smee impression, plus the 2 extra lore. One of my favorite overlooked Amber combos is a turn 2 Lantern into a turn 3 Aerial, which is great for setting up a Rapunzel heal on turn 4 or simply questing for the lore. But in a dwarf deck, Bashful will often be an even stronger turn 3 character, utilizing Snow White, Doc, or Lantern for the cost reduction. And finally, for our 7th and final of the 7 dwarves, we have Happy. He's a 5 cost Amber character with 3 strength, 5 willpower, and support, who can quest for 2 lore. His ability to throw 3 strength onto a fellow dwarf or other unit is pretty decent, and at 5 cost with such a good strength boost, he reminds me a bit of Maximus, trading off the bodyguard for an extra lore gained on the quest. Similarly, he's more playable than, say, the Sapphire Merlin because of that extra lore, extra bit of health, and the dwarf trait that'll synergize well within the deck. And finally, to round out all of the cards, let's circle back to Snow White. I have to mention the possibility of a Snow White Floodborn character. As we know, Snow White Unexpected House Guest is numbered 24 out of 204, and currently both card 23 and card 25 on either side are yet to be revealed. This could easily be a Floodborn Snow White that's able to bring the deck to even new heights, or at least a second Storyborn or Dreamborn Snow White that's able to bolster our dwarf deck further. Beyond that, I suppose there could be a yet to be revealed action or item card as well for more synergy, but even without that possibility, I think the 7 dwarfs look pretty strong already. At the very least, they'll be a super fun and thematic deck to play, regardless of their strength, perhaps similar to some princess lists from the first chapter. But I think they could be a more competitive deck as well. I suppose we'll have to wait to be certain, but let's take a look at how our core dwarfs package can work together with other cards in Amber and across other ink combos to unlock their full potential. Right off the bat, I think the dwarfs offer a new Amber opener that's very formidable, especially for more aggressive decks. Typically, Amber likes to play a line of Stitch and Simba into a 3-drop like Ariel, or a second ink character like Detective Mickey, Cheshire Cat, Tinkerbell, etc. Obviously, there's many other lines depending on your deck, but you get the idea. But I think the dwarves have some really fun openers as well they can unlock with Snow White. Even with just dwarfs or Snow White only, before we consider anything else, we could do something like turn 1, ink and pass, or you could play a 1-cost character. Turn 2, play Snow White. Turn 3, play another Snow White plus Doc, because now he costs 1 to play. Then on turn 4, you can go crazy with a big dwarf opener with Bashful, another Bashful, and another dwarf. you can fit all of that into 4 ink. Now look, this is hypothetical and it's actually near impossible because it requires you to be on the draw and then have all of these exact cards plus 4 inkable cards to pull it off. But I think it's worth examining that upper ceiling of our potential and then walk it back from there. There's many other easier to pull off lines available here, especially when you start to consider other cards in amber or other ink colors. Let's go through a few natural card synergies with other cards through each ink color. In amber, you have Lantern to reduce character cost even further. And of course you have Rapunzel as always. And she's gonna love some of these dwarfs that have a high willpower for their cost. They're gonna hold 2 or 3 damage nicely for those heals coming in. Also in amber, we have a new and improved song package. As always, Be Our Guest is a staple that all 7 dwarves will be able to sing. Zero to Hero is another 2-cost song that will synergize really nicely with the desire to get several dwarves out on the field. Perhaps it's a bit win more rather than an essential piece, but we'll have to wait to confirm that. Finally, we have another new song, World's Greatest Criminal Mind. This gives us some nice removal that Amber lacked in the first chapter, and it's singable by 5 of the 7 dwarves. Moving on to Amethyst, I haven't always been super fond of this ink pairing, but I suppose dwarves may invite the return of a Facilier-style zoo deck. However, I don't think that sounds super strong at the moment, but I do think Pocket Watch could be interesting with the dwarves, especially for Grumpy and Dopey, who encourage a challenge-heavy playstyle. Paired with Emerald, we of course have our beloved Lemon Lime Aggro staples, but we also have some great new additions in Rise of the Floodborn. I first think of Ring the Bell, which I predict is a new must-play in Emerald, especially in a deck like a Dwarves deck that's full of characters with lower strength. Similarly, Beast Relentless could work in a Battle Dwarf style deck, although he'll still probably shine much brighter in an Emerald Steel list. As for a Ruby pairing, a few things come to mind, like maybe Shield of Virtue or LeFou for some of the combat dwarfs. But I'm much more excited about a Doc skipping to Maui on turn 4, that's always fun. Another great new idea is a mid to late game Shere Khan drop, enabling your dwarfs to pick up lore from challenges. I mean seriously, why even consider playing Mulan at this point? I think Shere Khan is going to be incredibly good with go wide style decks, and the dwarfs can definitely satisfy that while still bringing a lot of willpower and questing strength to the table. In Sapphire, the new Gumbo Pot item could be an interesting choice with dwarfs, helping you keep them healthy. Similar to what we said in Ruby, Doc can skip straight to Maleficent or Aurora on turn 4, similar to Detective Mickey in a typical Amber Sapphire list. And finally, 4 dozen eggs could really foil an opponent's plan to stop your dwarves from questing by challenging into them. Finally, we have Steel, and we know how much Amber loves being paired with Steel. But let's look at a few newer cards for some fun ideas. Again, I like the idea of Doc getting out a 5-cost character on turn 4. With Steel, maybe consider Li Shang. He'll be able to give Evasive to any dwarves on board starting on turn 5. That's a great obvious defense against evasive aggro decks, which I'm certain will surge at the beginning of set 2. And here's an odd one, perhaps Tiana could work with the dwarves. Since every single dwarf is inkable and relatively cheap, especially with the reduced cost, I could see a world where you can play or ink your whole hand pretty quickly to make use of Tiana. Now, I'm still not fully convinced that a Tiana-focused deck is viable, but I think a dwarf's version could be fun to play around with. Now, as an overall tier list of sorts, I think Doc will end up as the MVP of the dwarves. I think he'll be a great pick on any Amber list, even without any other dwarfs or Snow White. The rest of our company will need a bigger dwarf package to work smoothly, but out of them, Snow White, Bashful, and Sneezy feel the strongest, with Happy, Sleepy, Dopey, and Grumpy lower in priority. Okay, well those were some of my thoughts about Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. What do you all think? Will some of those crazy lines even be possible in a game? And if not, will some of the more consistent combos be enough to push dwarves into the meta against all the other powerful cards in Rise of the Floodborn? And if we do see a Floodborn Snow White, what could she add to the dwarf's package to make it even stronger? Drop a comment below about all of that, or let me know what cards or deck I should cover next. I'll be giving my thoughts on every single Rise of the Floodborn card when everything is fully revealed, so stay tuned for that. It should be happening very soon, but until then, peace.